The fog rolled low over the pasture like a slow-moving tide, shrouding the land in a gentle, silver hush. The old man walked alone, shoulders hunched against the damp chill, boots pressing into soft earth that had once been firm beneath the younger man's stride. His name was Henry, and the land beneath him, though sold, still remembered him. The wind carried the faint creak of a half-swinging gate, the rustle of frostbitten leaves, and the memory of hoofbeats that once thundered freely across open fields. Henry clutched the worn leather lead in his hand, not out of necessity, but from habit. His fingers curled around it the way a child might cling to a blanket, not for use, but for comfort. Every step toward the stable was weighted with memories, of a life long lived, of losses quietly borne. The sky above was a soft bruise of gray, the promise of morning stretched thin. This day was different, final. He passed the skeletal fence, where the old rosebush used to bloom in spring, now tangled and lifeless. The barn stood like a sentinel in the haze, its wood bleached silver by years of sun and rain. Henry hesitated at the door. He touched the frame with reverence, then pushed it open, revealing the familiar scent of hay, wood, and the faint, wild musk of the creature he had come to see. Midnight stood quietly in his stall, tall and dark, his coat still gleaming like oil even in the low light. He didn't move at first. He simply watched, eyes deep and unblinking, as Henry stepped inside. That gaze held stories, ones they'd lived together, storms weathered, trails ridden, silences shared. Horses didn't speak, but Midnight never needed words. "Well, boy," Henry said, his voice a gravelly whisper softened by affection. "This is it." The stallion stepped forward, nostrils flaring gently. He sniffed at Henry's jacket, bumping the old man's chest with his muzzle, as if to ask, "Where have you been?" Henry let out a breath that sounded like a sigh, and a laugh all at once. "I've been thinking. Too much, probably." He reached up, running a trembling hand along Midnight's face, fingers tracing the familiar contours of bone and velvet. The horse leaned into it slightly, still as a statue, still as memory. Henry remembered the day they'd found each other. Midnight a wild, frightened colt in a ravine, caught between rocks after a flash flood. It had taken hours to get him free, days to gain his trust, years to build the bond that held firm now, even as everything else in Henry's life had fallen away. The ranch had once buzzed with life, his wife tending flowers in the garden, the boys chasing each other around the porch, hired hands laughing as they mucked stalls and mended fences. Now the house stood empty, the windows blind and gray. His wife had passed 10 years ago. The boys had left, scattered like birds too long caged. The ranch had become too much, so he'd sold it. The deal was done. Papers signed. Developers were set to bulldoze the pasture by spring and put in a golf course, of all things. But Henry had asked for one last visit, one final chance to say goodbye. To the land, to the house, to Midnight. "I'm not taking you with me," he said, gently brushing the horse's mane. "I wanted to. God, did I want to. But where I'm going, it ain't no place for a creature like you. It's small, paved, got walls all around it. You wouldn't like it." Midnight huffed, soft and disapproving. Henry chuckled without humor. "Didn't think you'd agree." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sugar cube, cradling it in his palm. Midnight took it delicately, lips brushing his skin like a blessing. Henry watched him chew, the slow rhythm oddly soothing. It steadied his heartbeat, if only for a moment. He stayed a while longer, brushing Midnight down in silence, every stroke careful and measured, the way a sculptor might handle a masterpiece for the last time. There was a reverence to it, a sorrow. At last, Henry straightened, joints cracking like dry twigs. He looked at the horse, his horse, one final time. "Goodbye, old friend." He turned toward the stall door. The air shifted. A sudden, sharp sound, hooves scraping against wood. Before Henry could react, Midnight lunged forward, blocking the gate with his massive body. He stomped once, ears pinned, eyes blazing with something Henry hadn't seen in years, defiance. "What are you doing, huh?" Henry asked, trying to nudge him aside. The horse wouldn't move. Henry took a step back. Midnight matched it. "This ain't a game now," he said, voice wavering. He tried again, firmer this time, pressing against the stallion's chest. Midnight planted his hooves, refusing. He let out a low, guttural snort and tossed his head, mane whipping like a flag in protest. Henry's throat tightened. The ache behind his eyes swelled. "You don't understand," he rasped. "I'm tired, boy. My bones don't work right. I get dizzy standing too fast. I wake up cuffing like I'm drowning. I'm no good to you anymore." Midnight stamped again. The emotion broke through. Henry's shoulders collapsed, and he slumped against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting in straw and dust. Tears slipped down his cheeks, hot against skin gone cold. "I ain't got much time left, and I don't want you watching me fade. You deserve more than that. You deserve fields, freedom, a place you can run without wondering if I'll still be standing when you look back." For a long while, neither moved. Only the quiet breathing of horse and man filled the barn. Midnight approached slowly. He bent his neck low, nuzzling Henry's hair with impossible gentleness. It was a gesture that said everything and nothing all at once. It was a protest, a plea, a promise. Henry sat frozen. The warmth of the horse's breath against his scalp broke something loose inside him. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was sentimental. But in that moment, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not yet. He pushed himself to his feet with effort, every joint voicing its complaint. Midnight stepped back just enough to let him rise, but remained close, as if afraid the old man might vanish into mist. Henry looked around the barn, at the cracked wood beams, the rusted tools, the dust-dappled light seeping through the slats. It wasn't much, but it was home. It had been, for a long time. "I'll stay the night," he said finally, voice low. "Just one more night." He led Midnight from the stall and out into the pasture. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing stretches of gold-brown grass and the broken skeletons of once robust trees. Midnight trotted ahead, tail high, like a creature reborn. Henry watched him go, arms hanging at his sides, heart full and cracked all at once. He'd come to say goodbye. But some goodbyes take longer than others, and some hearts, no matter how old, aren't quite ready to let go. The sun had barely crested the eastern ridge when the old man awoke to the sound of hooves against frostbitten earth. He lay still in the bed of his rusted pickup, parked beside the pasture, a thin blanket of snow dusting the windows like powdered sugar. His breath hung in the frigid morning air, visible even inside the cab. It took a few seconds for him to remember where he was and why. Charlie had come to say goodbye. That much hadn't changed. What had changed, though, what refused to let him settle, was the way Scout had acted yesterday. That look in the horse's eyes, not just recognition, not just familiarity. It was something deeper, a refusal. Charlie sat up, joints complaining, and turned the key. The engine coughed, then caught. The heater groaned to life. He rubbed his hands together, more from habit than from hope that he'd warm them. Scout stood by the fence line motionless, his breath rising in soft, steady clouds. Watching. There were things that still needed to be done before the auction. A meeting with the new ranch hands. Paperwork for the sale of the land. A goodbye that he'd intended to be brief, clean, and without fanfare. But Scout had thrown all that off course. Charlie didn't go back into town. Instead, he climbed out of the truck, stepped into the pasture, and walked toward the horse that refused to let him leave. Scout didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there like a stone monument to a life that had meant something once. Charlie reached out, let his palm rest lightly against the bay's shoulder, and closed his eyes. "You remember too much," he whispered, not sure if the words were for the horse or for himself. Scout nickered softly, his muzzle nudging Charlie's chest, almost impatiently. It wasn't the behavior of a beast saying goodbye. It was the insistence of an old friend refusing the final word. Charlie chuckled under his breath and gave the horse a light swat. "You're not making this any easier, you know." He spent the rest of the morning moving through the ranch, like a man searching for something to do with his hands. The corrals were empty now, save for Scout. The barn smelled of wood dust and dried hay. Most of the equipment had already been sold. Only the hollow echo of his boots on the floorboards kept him company as he walked through the old house one last time. Photos lined the mantel, frames of his late wife, of Scout as a foal, of rodeos and county fairs, of days that no longer returned his calls. He lingered at a faded picture of himself, younger, stronger, standing beside Scout with a first-place ribbon in hand. They looked like brothers back then, or perhaps like soldiers who'd made it out of something terrible together. The phone rang once in the kitchen. Charlie ignored it. When he returned to the pasture that afternoon, something had changed. Scout wasn't at the fence. He wasn't grazing either. He was gone. Panic didn't hit Charlie all at once. It rose like floodwater, slow but unstoppable. He jogged, then ran, across the pasture, heart slamming. The gate stood open. "Scout!" he yelled, voice rasping into the empty hills. The old man checked the perimeter. Tracks, faint in the snow, led down into the ravine behind the property, toward the trees. A place Scout hadn't been in years. Charlie didn't hesitate. The snow was light but steady, and the wind stung his cheeks. He followed the trail downhill, boots slipping on hidden ice. The trail wound into a hollow, surrounded by cottonwoods, their bare branches stretching upward like skeletal hands. There, standing at the base of the largest tree, was Scout. He was still, waiting. Charlie slowed, catching his breath. "What are you doing out here, boy?" He approached cautiously, the way you would a wild animal, though he knew better. Scout wasn't wild. He was loyal, more loyal than Charlie had deserved, especially after all this. Then he saw it. The stone, half buried beneath the snow and moss. It leaned at an angle near the base of the tree. Carved into its surface was a name, Margaret Hayward, his wife. Charlie froze. How the hell had Scout remembered? It had been nearly 10 years since her ashes were scattered here. They'd placed the stone to market, sure, but they hadn't come back. Charlie couldn't. Too much pain. Too many ghosts. But Scout had never forgotten. And now, of all moments, he had brought Charlie back. The old man dropped to his knees. For a long while, he said nothing, just stared at the stone and listened to the hush of wind through trees. Then he spoke, slowly, the words cracking from the cold, or maybe grief. "I thought if I sold the place, moved to town, maybe I could forget too," he said. "But you wouldn't let me, would you?" Scout stepped beside him and stood sentinel. Charlie laughed, a hoarse, bitter sound. "You stubborn fool." But the bitterness faded as quickly as it came, and what replaced it was something softer. Grief, yes, but also gratitude. A strange, impossible kind of peace. That night, Charlie didn't sleep in his truck. He made a fire back at the ranch house, sat in his old chair, ate beans from a can. Scout lay in the pasture like a statue carved from dusk. Charlie watched him through the window, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. Morning came slow, with bruised clouds overhead and frost crisping the ground. Charlie stood by the kitchen sink, sipping coffee, when he made his decision. He'd cancel the auction, sell the land if he had to, but not Scout. Never Scout. He picked up the phone, but before he could dial, headlights cut across the yard. A black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a man in a tailored coat, and behind him, a younger woman with a clipboard. Auction agents. Charlie set the phone down. They greeted him politely, then walked the perimeter, spoke in clipped tones, took notes, didn't ask about Scout. And that was the problem. When they finally stood before him, one of them said, "You've got one horse left. The registry says he's a bay. A gelding. About 20 years old." Charlie nodded slowly. "Would you be interested in selling him separately? We've got a few clients interested in older, gentler horses. Therapy programs. Retirement homes for riders." Charlie didn't answer. He looked past them, toward the field. Scout stood at the far end, looking back. The woman with the clipboard waited for his answer. And then, without warning, Scout began to walk. Not a trot, not a canter. A slow, deliberate walk toward the fence. Toward Charlie. The agents turned, unsure. Scout stopped 10 feet away, held Charlie's eyes. Charlie took a step forward. So did the horse. And in that moment, there was no snow. No ranch. No agents. Just the two of them, locked in something deeper than language. Scout lowered his head. Charlie raised a hand. "No," he said finally. He's not for sale. The agents paused, clearly confused. Sir, I said no. He's not going anywhere. A beat of silence. Then the man in the coat cleared his throat. We'll update the records. Charlie watched them go. When the SUV disappeared down the road, he turned to Scout and whispered, Guess we're both too old to start over, huh? Scout nickered just once. Charlie smiled, and for the first time, he didn't feel like he was saying goodbye. The days that followed were quiet, but not empty. Charlie moved through them with an unfamiliar sense of purpose, like a man rediscovering his place in the world one step at a time. He tended to Scout's hooves, brushed his coat until it gleamed under the pale spring sun, and mended a broken rail in the pasture fence with more care than urgency. There was no longer a deadline pressing down on him, only the rhythm of days spent doing something that mattered. Scout had become more than a companion again. He was a reason, a lifeline. Every morning the horse waited at the gate, ears perked, as if to remind Charlie that the story wasn't over just because the world had said so. They began riding again. At first, only for a few minutes, cautious and slow. Both of them were learning how to trust their own bodies. But it came back. The feel of saddle leather beneath him, the gentle sway of movement, the unspoken communion between a rider and his horse, forged through years and sealed with silence. It wasn't long before Charlie led Scout up the trail that wound along the ridge overlooking the valley. The air was thin, the trees still bare from winter's retreat, and the silence was pierced only by the soft clop of hooves and the occasional chirp of returning birds. At the summit, they paused, and Charlie looked out across the land that had raised him. Fences snaked across distant pastures. The barn roof glinted faintly in the sun. He could see the tree where Margaret Stone lay nestled at the roots, hidden but never forgotten. He breathed in deeply. For the first time, it felt like home again. But peace is a fragile thing. And time, that cruel and constant thief, waits for no one. It began with a limp. Subtle at first, just a hesitation in Scout's left foreleg after a longer ride. Charlie noticed it, but said nothing. He rubbed liniment into the joint and let the horse rest. But the next day, the limp returned, more pronounced. The day after that, Scout didn't rise to meet him at the fence. Charlie called the vet. Dr. Reyes arrived just past noon in a blue truck with dented doors and a kind face. She had treated Scout years ago, back when Margaret was still alive, and she remembered the old gelding the moment she stepped out. He's aged well, she said, patting Scout's neck. But age always catches up. Charlie stood in the frostbitten grass, his arms crossed tightly, watching every movement, every flicker of expression on her face as she examined him. After a long silence, she straightened. Arthritis, she said gently. Advanced. The joint's inflamed, and the limp will only get worse. He's already compensating, which means his back and other legs will soon follow. Charlie nodded once. He didn't need the explanation. He'd seen it before in friends, in himself. There's medication, she offered. Pain management, some supplements. Light riding if he tolerates it. But he won't be the horse you remember. And eventually, you'll have to decide when it's time. Her words were clinical, careful, but they cut all the same. That night, Charlie didn't light a fire. He sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the moon cast silver shadows over the pasture. Scout stood still under the oak tree, quiet and unmoving. There was no decision to make, not yet, but it lingered in the air like a storm that hadn't yet broken. The weeks passed with new rituals. Charlie gave Scout his medication every morning, massaged his aching leg, and led him on gentle walks instead of rides. They visited Margaret's tree often, always in silence, as if drawn there by an invisible thread of memory. The spring thaw softened the ground, coaxing wildflowers from the earth and turning the hills green again. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from a veterans equine therapy group in Montana. They had heard, through one of the auction agents, that Charlie had kept Scout. The organization ran programs for veterans struggling with PTSD and physical trauma, and they wanted to know if Charlie would consider bringing Scout out for a visit, just a short one, to see if the horse might be a fit for their gentle riding program. Charlie read the letter twice. Then again, he folded it slowly and set it on the table. That afternoon, He drove into town for the first time in weeks. He stopped at the feed store, picked up a new saddle blanket, some ointment, and a pair of travel boots for Scout. Then he drove out to the post office and mailed a letter back. 3 lines, nothing more. Thank you for writing. He's old, but he's still got heart. We'll be there. They left 3 days later. The trailer rattled down the highway, Scout calm inside, Charlie's grip steady on the wheel. The mountains loomed in the distance, snow still clinging to their peaks, and the wind carried the scent of pine and dust. It felt like stepping into another life. A new chapter. The ranch was tucked into a valley surrounded by forest, its fields dotted with horses of every color and size. Charlie pulled into the gravel drive, heart pounding, unsure of what to expect. A young man in a cowboy hat approached, offered his hand, and helped Charlie unload. Scout stepped out slowly, sniffed the air, and gave a soft snort. There were veterans on the porch of the main lodge, men and women, some in wheelchairs, some leaning on canes, all of them watching with quiet eyes. One of them, a tall man with a prosthetic arm and sunburned cheeks, walked over. He held out an apple in one hand and waited. Scout approached, slow but steady, and took it from him. The man smiled. "What's his name?" "Scout," Charlie said. The man nodded. "He looks like he's seen things." Charlie chuckled. "He has. So have I." Scout spent the next few days moving through the program, like he'd always belonged. He let the veterans brush him, feed him, lead him around the ring. One woman, who hadn't spoken since arriving 2 weeks earlier, laughed aloud when Scout bumped her hand for a second carrot. They asked Charlie to speak during one of the evening bonfires. He almost said no. But that night, beneath a sky full of stars, he stood before them anyway, shoulders square, voice gravelly, and told them about a boy who had once been broken, and the horse that had made him whole. About Margaret, about the ranch, about losing things that matter, and finding something worth holding on to. When he finished, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Later, as the fire died down, Charlie sat beside Scout in the quiet. "You did good, boy," he whispered. "Better than I ever could." Scout nickered once and lowered his head to Charlie's shoulder. He stayed another week. When it was time to go, the program director stopped him at the gate. "We'd like to keep him," she said gently. "Just for as long as he's comfortable. We'll take care of him, and you can visit any time." Charlie looked at Scout. The old horse was standing in the field, surrounded by people who needed him, people who saw him. And for the first time, Charlie understood something he hadn't before. Scout wasn't just his horse anymore. He never had been. He was a bridge, a healer, a reminder of what still mattered. Charlie swallowed the lump in his throat. "Take good care of him." "We will." He stepped into the truck and turned the key. The engine roared to life. As he pulled away, Scout lifted his head and watched the truck disappear down the road, eyes steady. Charlie didn't look back. He didn't have to. He knew Scout would be all right, because some goodbyes aren't endings. They're beginnings in disguise.